We are live, Dr. Mariche and I. Dr. Mariche is a psychologist and a historian and one of the most educated people I've met for a while online. I met him on Facebook in an anti feminist group, and he's also a Muslim. And I'm trying to interest him in secular Quranism, and he's asking a few questions about its viability and integrity. So welcome, Dr. Murray. It's very good to have you.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. It's a pleasure to share and to listen to different input, and this is what a constructive and progressive sort of thing in order to get to really a better world than the one we already have. And if we don't listen to each other and trying to share our input and try to reach a logical conclusion, then we'll have the same problem throughout history and we'll end up only destroying each other. So I think that we should really share our inputs and try to understand each other without bias, without personal bias, and maybe we'll see good results after that.
Yes, and I think what's important is for us to be patient with each other and keep going, even if we don't agree. Because I think a lot of people misunderstand each other and think. Um, I think people misunderstand the meaning of words, or they assume they agree on the meaning of words, and then they don't. And what you said about being logical is so important because I think in our post-truth society, people don't necessarily uh, act on truth and logic. They act on, I think, the probability of success. So I think what happens is that they may agree with you about the truth and logic of your proposition, but they might not want to be seen to be supporting you because they think in the short term it will get them cancelled and people will disapprove of them.
Exactly, because I think that the debate in its roots, it's not actually about logic itself. It's much more rudimentary than that. It's about logic itself because it's subjective. It's not objective. What seems logical to you seems illogical to someone else, and that could be the basic of all the problems. So we need to establish certain grounds, common grounds of objective realities, and we can build those. Because when we start on the fact that perception is reality instead of the collective perception that should be reality, then we're going to have a problem. We cannot
Yes,
even agree on simplistic things.
yes, I think the attitude of most corrupt people is what's in it for me? You want me to agree with you? What are you going to give me? What is my reward? And if you have nothing to give me, then I won't do. I won't even tell the truth. I won't even agree with what is logical unless you can promise me an immediate reward. So I
Exactly.
think
That's
that's also a problem. Short term thinking as opposed to long term thinking.
and it comes from the decay of the morality of the human being because what's right is right and should be right no matter what. And it doesn't matter whether you receive a reward or you don't. You just say it out of morality. But if that dies, then materialistic thinking will take over and we'll end up with this very problem of I should get something in order to say what's right instead of just saying it right because it should be said.
Yes, and you were talking about perception of reality, and this brings us to God, I think, because if we believe in the Abrahamic God, then we would believe in the afterlife, and we would also believe that good will be rewarded and evil punished, either in this life or the next. But if we don't, then our thinking and our actions will be based on something else than doing the right thing just because it is the right thing to do.
Exactly. But when it comes to the definition of a God, do you think that if God spoke to us through the books that we have, and those words are very limited in quantity? For example, the Quran is 114 surah, and the number of words is limited. Do you think it's enough to understand once and for all?
I think even
If it's
um,
truly the
even if
word
you
of
say
God,
it's not enough, people find it difficult to read all of the Bible or all of the Quran. I'm sorry,
even
I
even
interrupted you.
even the people who speak Arabic very well and who are native to the language and understand the language of that time, I mean the Asian people of that time, they found it somewhat difficult, and there were some controversies to understand because that's what makes it evidently the word of God, because it's infinitely complex. It cannot be understood once and for all. For example, if I give you something and you understand it, then you're over it. One of the most important reasons is to not to be understood in its entirety once and for all. It's an evolutionary mechanism that should be progressive throughout the time. And this is one of the biggest problems in Islam that we are seeing right now, because we are stuck in a culture of medieval interpretations. And there are certain basics that we should build on them, but we have stopped for centuries. And this is why you see certain things that seems completely illogical, but the truth is they were just compatible with the time, not this time.
Were you saying that the Quran is only compatible with Mohammedan times? Was that what you were saying, or did I
No,
misunderstand?
no, I'm talking about the interpretations that came afterwards and the
Oh, I see.
understanding of the word of God.
Yes, and I know that even then, people would disagree about the interpretation, and well, the
Mhm.
Shiites
They did
came up
not
in, I think, the
disagree
Middle
on the
Ages.
interpretation. They did not disagree on the interpretation of what can be made into law. They disagreed on what can be made into faith. Because to understand and to define the nature of God, whether he has a hand, whether he has an eye or he doesn't, what is his nature, what's the nature of the heavens, what's the nature of hell, is it a materialistic nature, is it a metaphysical nature? These are the things that were really a debate. But when it comes to the laws, the verses of Quran that can be made into laws, there was no dispute about that. Those lines were pretty clear.
Right, so it's do's and don'ts of God, the commands and prohibitions, and it seems to me that there is no agreement on the actual number of verses that are that should have legislative um, power. Is there? I mean, I've asked it several Muslims, and I think they only say something like it's about 500 verses.
There is
That
there is no question about uh, whether it's something that should be done or shouldn't be done. What there is a question is how are we able to enforce it? Because enforcing certain things requires, and this is even observed in our modern societies, where we see that the budget of enforcement of a law is one of the biggest concerns when you're trying to write a law in the first place. Because if you cannot find the budget to enforce something, then it's pointless to write it in the first place.
yes, because eventually it would bring the law into contempt. But can you think of an example of a verse that has caused Muslim rulers a problem?
Can I think of a verse?
Yes, I was wondering what verse might Islamic scholars over the centuries have disagreed about as regards its legislative
Yeah.
capacity.
Let's take the first era. Let's take like the first week after Muhammad died. They
Hmm.
refused to do that, even
They
though the
refused
order
to what? Sorry, I didn't catch it. What you said.
they refused to pay the zakat. The zakat is like this tax system in the Islam, where the rich should pay
Two point
uh,
five percent.
2.5% once he reaches a certain level. That's it. Yes, but they
Yes, I suppose that's in the Hadith, isn't it? The actual number is not specified in the Quran.
exactly that's in the Hadith, and those people knew what Muhammad did pay. But the thing is, the balance of powers changed, and Muhammad didn't have the upper hand, and his friends, his companions didn't really have the power to enforce that law. That's why Hurub Ridda started, the wars of Ridda, they call them,
Hmm.
because the companions of the Prophet did not have the power to enforce that law. The second they didn't have that power, I mean, the war broke. And as much as it's 2.5%, it's nothing, but they refused it.
Mm. So
Simply
how
because
was the situation resolved? I mean, obviously somebody won the war. Did the right people win the war, and then it
yes,
was reimposed?
yes, it was Abu Bakr, the first caliphate after Muhammad, and he ruled for 2 years, and most of the period of his ruling was a war, and then they won. And after that, the ruling of Umar ibn al-Khattab established, and at that time, they mobilized all the forces they were in those tribes who fought Abu Bakr for the zakat. They moved them to forces in the frontier to fight the Romans and the Persians in the Qadisiyah and the Yarmouk battles. And after that, like both empires fell to the progression of the conquering of Muslims.
Hmm.
So they tried to mobilize the anger of the defeated people inside Saudi Arabia or the Arabian Peninsula, and they moved into the frontiers in Syria, modern Syria, and modern Iraq to fight the Persians and the Romans. So they sort of absorbed the anger of the tribes in order to something like that will not happen again.
Hmm. So after triumphing over the Persians and the Romans, people were happy to pay up again. Is that what you're saying?
No, they were forced to pay because if they did not pay, that law would be enforceable.
Right,
They
right.
they know that it's not an option to not pay because we consider the people who say that they are Muslims and do not pay the zakat that they are not Muslims and they are to be fought.
Hmm. Hmm.
And especially if they live in a territory that is ruled by Islam. So the fact that the Sharia law states that you should pay the zakat if you are a Muslim, because the zakat is not an obligation for people who are non-Muslims who live under Muslim ruling.
Yes, I said yes. It's a badge of Muslim identity. I see now.
For Muslim rich people who reach a certain level of wealth, they should pay every year 2.5%.
Hmm.
But if they declare themselves as Muslims and then they say we're not Muslims, then the law will be enforceable on them.
Hmm. Hmm. So, what school of Sharia are you, Dr. Mariche?
I'm a Sunni.
Hmm. And I've been talking about the caliphate recently because I've been asking um, who who would be the caliph, and I thought, well, isn't the most powerful Islamic state in the world the caliphate? Isn't that how it was always done?
Well, the caliphate had its problems from the beginning because when it comes to verifiable historic evidence, you gotta understand that in history, when you find two people who fought each other throughout history and they say the same thing, it gives it highly, highly credible documentation in history. But when they say different things, we can take into account other factors such as the historian bias or certain political agenda in order to manipulate the facts to orient them to give yourself the righteousness. So this is what happened between Sunni and Shia. For example, when the Prophet died, he did not leave correct instructions. He did not leave any man behind him with an explicit word. He did not give the order. No, he didn't. However, there were certain things that took place that gave a lot of suggestions that the Shia Muslims now use as evidence, as historical evidence, that Ali ibn Talib was the one who should be caliph after him. And it's somewhat logical. It cannot be denied, as a matter of fact, because uh, Ali was supposed to stay with Muhammad because he was sick. And there is Usama ibn Zayd. Usama ibn Zayd was the leader of the Muslim army, and the Muhammad gave him explicit orders to gather everyone who can carry an arm and take them to fight, except for Ali, who should stay with him. So it's some sort of a way to remove the army and to remove the power from the Medina. So when the Prophet dies, Ali will be there, and he will be the one who would be elected as caliph. And the day Muhammad Ali Abu peace be upon him died, there was a meeting in a place called the Saqifa. And the Saqifa, other leaders from the Medina met, people who were supposed to go to the war, including Abu Bakr, including Omar, and including almost companions. And then, because those leaders were not really close to Muhammad and they were mostly tycoons of their times, it was Abu Bakr and Omar who decided to take a step and try to stop them from doing that, only to that meeting to end up electing Abu Bakr. So when they came back, then we start the differences. This is historically accurate because both Shia and Sunnah agree on this. But what's not accurate is whether Ali accepted or didn't accept in the first 6 months, because some stories say that it was like 6 months when he did not accept, and he said that it was a problem. How could they dare to discuss such a subject without him when he was busy dealing with the funeral of the Prophet? And
Mhm.
so it was a problem from the beginning. But they all accepted Abu Bakr because everyone already elected him, and they did not want it to cause further problems, especially that the Prophet is dead and no one is left behind him explicitly by him. So we don't have a system to do that. And then after that, Abu Bakr tried to do his best, and he ordered Omar after him to be the caliph.
Mhm.
So
I was
start from the beginning.
mhm. So, um, I was reading yesterday. I think it was some. It's probably a neocon website. I could look it up for you, but my question was, what made the Persians take such a point about it that they used this story to um, cause sectarianism amongst Muslims, and the answer seemed to be that the Arabs were being very arrogant towards non-Arabs, and the Persians got sick of it and thought, we're not going to follow your kind of Islam, we're going to create our own kind, so you won't get to lord it over us. Does this story ring a bell anywhere?
Yes, of course. This is actually the history of the greatest schism. That's the schism that separates the Sunni from the Shia once and forever. And they were separated pretty early in Islamic history, like 30 years after after the Prophet died. And it's still existing from that time till today. I mean, we never healed from it. Because, like you said, the Arabs, in theory, when you read the Quran, everyone is equal. Arabs, non-Arabs. Once you accepted Islam and understand its laws, we are called Muslims. It doesn't matter whether you're an Arab or a black or a white or a red, it doesn't matter. But the reality is, What Arabs did, they like turned into that old tribalism of theirs, where they thought they were should be very proud because not because of Islam itself, but because Islam came to them instead of other people. And this was a little bit too tough. And the problem started in the Uthman ibn Affan. It was like the third caliph after Muhammad died, when they conquered Iraq. And now, for the first time, the Arabian land have rivers and agriculture. So new riches entered the caliphate, and they said that this is nothing but a garden of Quraysh. Quraysh is the tribe or the Medina where
Mhm,
in Mecca, a tribe in
mhm,
Mecca. They said that the rivers of Iraq and its gardens are nothing but a garden to Quraysh, and that pissed off people in Iraq because they said Quraysh would have never had these gardens if it wasn't for Islam, and we're all Muslims, and our loyalty should be to Islam, not to Quraysh. So this
mhm.
is how the debate started, and it led to so many catastrophes.
I suppose as somebody who doesn't know the detail of these stories, it seems to me that these differences in interpretation um, just wouldn't apply now. Because what I imagine if different countries were to adopt Sharia would be that each country that adopted Sharia would have its own Supreme Court. And obviously it would interpret Quranic principles according to their own legal traditions, and nobody would really be able to stop them from doing that. And um, whatever whatever the rights and wrongs of interpretation, surely that would be an improvement on
Exactly,
to what
exactly.
it is now.
If you analyze the history of all the history of the 14,000 or the 1400 years of Islamic history, you'll find that they really had only one problem: who rules them from the day the Prophet dies. That was our problem. That was the biggest problem that led us to the thing that we are here. Because reinterpreting and trying to interpret in a way to manipulate the masses toward your cause and using Islam and Quran to do so is something that was created because of a schism, not because of a unity. We did not had a unity. Like, the unity problem was our problem from the beginning, because the first day Muhammad died, this problem started. And it evolved quietly because the men at the time were wise and they were smart how to deal with the problems. But later on, it exploded in our faces. And our problem throughout history was, who leads us? That's it.
But was there ever a time in Islamic history where there were two countries or two Muslim leaders saying, "I'm the caliph," and another one saying, "No, you're not the caliph, I am"?
Mm. Yes,
Was
there was
there
a
such a
time.
time?
Yeah, it was a time, and it was actually pretty close after the Prophet died. It's about like 30 years after the Prophet died. It's in the second fitna between Ali ibn Talib and Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan and Amr ibn al-As. All three of them were considered as caliphs in their regions, and there was another group of people after the Battle of Safin. You can look it up, between Ali and Muawiyah. It lasted for 9 days. And when Ali was about to win against Muawiyah, the founder of the Umayyad Caliphate, a group of his army decided that these people ruled against the rule of Allah, and all of them are heretics and they should be killed. All three
Mhm,
of them, Ali
mhm.
and Muawiyah and Omar and Amr ibn al-As. All three of them should be killed. And they succeeded in killing Ali, and they did not kill Muawiyah and Amr ibn al-As. And Muawiyah and Amr ibn al-As ended up building the Umayyad Caliphate, and they took ruling from that and forward. And because of that, there was so many disagreements afterwards, because the Ali ibn Abi Talib left two kids, and Hassan and Al Hussein, and according to the Iraqi people, they were entitled to become the caliphates, the caliphs after him. And war started afterwards, and they stopped it. Al Hassan stopped it. He said that if Muawiyah wants to be caliph, then let him be caliph. And once he dies, the position of a caliph goes to me, and so forth, so forward. And the problem was that Al Hassan died 10 years before Muawiyah did. And here where all the stories come to. We Sunnis have evidence that his death was normal. Shias say that they have evidence, although not really verifiable, that he was poisoned. So we don't really know what happened. And after that, the agreement fell apart because now Al Hassan is dead and Muawiyah is alive. And who is going to be caliph after Muawiyah? And they were both very old when Hassan died. So Muawiyah did sort of a change of heart, and he decided to appoint his son. And he upset a lot of people. A lot of good companions of the Prophet were upset. They said that the Islamic State is not some sort of a kingdom that your son can inherit. And beside your son, we know him. I mean, he's a drunken little kid, and
Mhm.
that was a problem where I think two battles were fought in order to enforce that by the Umayyads. And then afterwards, then his son really took it, and Al Hussein did not like it, and he rose up a small army, and then they left him, and then they killed him. And that's when was like really it broke through. And secularism really born in Islam in that area, because that area what the Muslims were observing, that they had leaders who were like the most morally and the most capable rulers they had. They were like the most knowledgeable people in this religion. And then they end up with this kid who have nothing to do with how to run governments, and he's drunk, and he's not like Muslim the way they say they talk about him, and he ended up ruling them. So there were some scholars, we call them the scholars of the scholars of the power. Job was try to find interpretations to embed secularism into Islam by saying that you should leave the ruling to rulers, and you should practice freely, and we are going to enforce your laws if you like that so much, but do not try and cross the ruler. And that did not really play well. And there was like 60 wars in the time between 10 years after the Prophet dies to like 100 years after the Prophet dies. So the first 100 years in the Umayyad Caliphate, and it expanded tremendously. I mean, there was like interior conflict and exterior wars. So it was a period of war.
Mhm. But isn't the problem right from the beginning about the nature of a caliph who I read somewhere is not a king? So, I mean, isn't that reasonably well established, or is it still in dispute about whether a caliph is a king and has a kingdom, or is a constitutional dictator of an Islamic republic?
Well, there is this Mubaya thing, which is some sort of a system of election where people say that I choose that guy and I choose that guy. And the thing is, we do not have an established system in Islam that really gives a structure of a government that is very clear according to our modern days, where you have the legislative way and the executive. So we don't have that. And one of the reasons why a lot of Muslim scholars thinks that we did not leave that, I mean, the Prophet knew that, but why didn't he give it to us? That's one of the deepest questions in Islam. I mean, because we think that if he did, Islam would have ruled the world.
But perhaps he was
But
too
God
ill
explicitly
to
said
think
in
of
the Quran,
a way of doing it.
and God explicitly said in the Quran, if he wanted, he would have made us one nation, but he did not want it to make us one nation.
Well, I suppose if God exists, he would be making the point of, well, I gave you these instructions and you wouldn't follow them properly. They're reasonably clear, but you wanted to take a point on these things in order to um, serve your own political interests, and this is where it has got you. But I would have thought at the moment, the logic is still there that the caliph must be the most powerful Islamic republic in the world, and that makes it Iran. But I know the Sunnis will go over our dead bodies. We will never accept, the Shias being more powerful than us.
Well, this is a modern political issue, and to be quite frank, it's not about faith or Islam, it's about political interests, period. So, all that religion, Shia versus Sunni, there is no Shia, no Sunni. When it comes to the political game, it's just who gets rich and who gets dead. I mean, that's the political game. But leaders in their world use these ways to manipulate people. I mean, people of faith, they see people of faith as cattle to be moved toward their political interest. That's most of leaders. You think that Saudi Arabian leaders are Muslims? I really really doubt that. Most leaders of the Muslim worlds are practically not Muslims. They use Islam because it serves a very good political agenda, and especially because the majority of the population do not understand Islam for what it stands.
Mhm. So, what it currently lacks is an orderly structure of power transfer, and nobody really wants to talk about it because, well, the Gulf kingdoms just shouldn't even be there, should they? That they're not the best people to run. Well, I mean, they shouldn't even be there because they're kings, wouldn't you say? Or maybe it's not good for you to say.
No, you mean the caliphate is a kingdom?
Well, I'm saying that the Gulf kingdoms um,
Yeah,
would not be considered properly halal. I suppose I'm saying that the ideal um, state for Muslims who are properly operating their religion would be a republic, and the caliph would be. Well,
yeah,
the thing is, the
that's the
caliph
truth.
would be the most powerful Islamic state in the world, wouldn't he?
Saudi Arabia, for example, they have a king and they call it a king, but no, they don't call it a king. They call him the servant of the two mosques of the Mecca and the Medina. That's what they call him, the servant of the two mosques.
But I thought he was an absolute monarch.
That's the
Is he an
reality of
absolute
things,
monarch?
but we do not call it directly that way. That would trigger certain questions like the ones you're bringing right now. So, for better propaganda, we call him the servant of the two mosques of Mecca and Medina. This will make Muslims really feel like he's serving their holy place. And what they say about the process of his selection, which is completely via inheritance, but they don't call it that way. They call it the same way that we Muslims selected Omar and Abu Bakr. And they call it the bay'ah, like the first election system. So they
Mhm.
have their way of calling things to repaint them from their reality. But the truth is, he's an absolute monarch who got there by a military coup against the Ottoman Empire, and that's it. Support from the United States of America. That's it.
Mhm. Mhm. So I suppose I think I suppose I was long to tidy up these loose ends, and I was thinking, how about a kind of papal conclave of Muslim national leaders, and this seems to be that. Uh, I mean, I think you know how a papal conclave works. All the cardinals of the Catholic Church are locked in a Sistine Chapel, and they vote for somebody who think, um, is the best person to be Pope, and they are only let out of the Sistine Chapel when they finally vote for someone. Um,
This
and
was created by Omar ibn al-Khattab.
I'm sorry.
This was actually created by the second Rashidun Caliphate, Omar ibn al-Khattab.
Oh, the
Yes, it was
papal
created.
conclave rules was created by him.
Yes, he created this system because he was stabbed in his prayer place, and then when he saw that he was dead, and all people that he was asking politely refused to become caliph. So what he did, he asked six, and he said that nobody will get out until they vote one of them. And those six were highly valued in the society because they were the first companions of the prophet, and one of the tens that they were one of the tens first companion of the prophet. That's it.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, I mean, that seems to be the way. I mean, I guess people might argue like, oh, Turkey, you can't join us because you're only a secular state, and oh, Saudi Arabia, you can't join us because you're an absolute monarchy, and you know, and I guess Iran might say, well, I guess we're the only one who's a properly halal. Um, Islamic State because we're not a kingdom and we are the most powerful Islamic state in the world and therefore we are the caliph and that the caliphate. Um,
And at the end, it won't be logical because when it comes to history, whoever is strong is always right.
that's yes. So that would make sense, wouldn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
I
it
can
makes
imagine
sense.
other countries saying, oh no, you're not. We're going to convert to um, Islam
But
now. And I
here's
suppose,
the problem:
supposing
when you do
America were
something,
to say,
you
oh, they're going to
do
convert.
something for the right reasons, it lasts even when you're weak. But when you do something for the wrong reason, it only lasts as long as you're strong.
Yes, yes. And the idea is that the good should be strong and the strong should be good.
And this will give you a definition of what happens in the countries that were non-Muslims and then they became Muslims. For example, my country, we were conquered by the Muslims, and then because they did, and they brought us the system and the education, and because, for example, one of the first hospital systems were in the Umayyad Caliphate. One of the first education universities were in the Umayyad Caliphate. Actually, they built here in Algeria one of the oldest universities. It's even older than the Sorbonne of Paris, Oxford in England.
Hmm.
So at that time, people were learning about Islam the right way, away from the wars and away from the political conflicts and stuff. So they actually accept it for what it is, not enforced by them like democracies being brought to Iraq or to whatever poor country.
Hmm.
They did not insist on their approach to solving the problem. They simply present it as logically and as powerfully as they could, and people accepted. And this is why Islam lasted for like a thousand years in my country because we accept it for what it is, and it was done to us not by force but by righteousness. And even though the French came afterwards and like they tried to erase the identity of this country from the ground for 130 years, but they couldn't do that because it only lasted as long as they were capable of enforcing it. That's it. But if you really raise a population that it's afraid of enforcing the law instead of actually believing in it, then it's a failed society. It only functions as long as the government function. And this is a very good point. Uh, as Mr. Bolson said, he said that the West criticizes us for having failed government, but we should criticize them for having a failed society because our society works even with a failed government, but can their society works if their government fails?
Yes, they would be at each other's throats. It would
Exactly.
be a Mad Max world.
Yes, but here, for example, in the third world, Governments don't do nothing for us. I mean, we take care of each other, we work for each other, and even if there is a problem, we solve it in each other. We try as maximum as we can to keep it from the legal system because it will take like decades. So we try to solve it between us. And when a man gives you his word, it's his word. He'll die for it. You can believe that. But can we say that about most Westerners? I don't think
Mm,
so.
no. So I think we're both agreed that whether God exists or not, governments who want to keep order should encourage belief in God.
Actually, it helps them very much.
Yes, it helps them do the right thing because,
And it helps.
sorry,
But listen, if you try to convince them that God exists, you're going to ask the question, which God? Is it the God that says the government is the right hand of God? Or is it the God that says, do not fear anyone but me? Because one of them is dangerous to the government and the other one is an ally to the government.
the Abrahamic God has been defined as omnipotent, omniscient, supreme, eternal, and perfectly moral. So that would be the God that we're supposed to believe in.
And if we believe in him, then we should obey him. And we should not obey people who are morally corrupt or liberals or whatever. So that would be very dangerous to believe in a God like that to a liberal government, wouldn't you say?
Yes, but then they would have to find arguments against this idea. And so far in
They
the
did.
West, there is still the idea of God, even if
They
most of
did.
them don't believe in
It's
it.
called atheism. They try to renounce it in its entirety because if a human is alone and doesn't have a god and doesn't fear, doesn't have purpose, and his purpose is the money they control, then then he's doomed. He's got nothing in his power to do against the government. And atheism is something that goes against religion. It doesn't believe in good or bad. It just goes to believes in change. And yet they come to the podium and they talk about morality, where the truth is, when you are an atheist, you shouldn't believe in a morale or good or bad. You should only believe in change. So, how could you justify the good from the bad when you only believe in change?
Well, I suppose an atheist would say, how dare you say that atheists are not capable of morality? We don't murder, rob, rape, steal, um, just because we're atheists. And, this sort of, I mean, they take the sort of position, don't they? So
Yeah,
I guess the way to attack them and undermine their beliefs is that, but you're easily threatened
I
because you
understand
don't believe
perfectly.
in an afterlife. You won't stand by any principle, and you're
But
very easy to threaten and bribe.
yes, but the question is, why do you find it distasteful? Where does this boundary come from?
It's a boundary between truth and lies, and people who keep their promises and people who don't.
Now, for example, I am alone and I can kill this person and take his money and no one would notice. Why an atheist would say it's wrong? From where did this wrong came from? After all, he's just a matter that's gonna dissolve and go away. Who's gonna notice the difference?
I suppose the idea, well, the atheists were to feel bad about it. He was saying, well, I don't want to be murdered and robbed, therefore I mustn't rob and murder others. It's the principle of reciprocity. So a group of atheists could jointly agree that there should be laws against murder and robbery and theft and that kind of thing.
Yes, of course, but the problem is, where did this reciprocity came from? After all, you can prove that you are conscious and you cannot prove that the others are conscious. I mean, how can you prove that this world is a complete illusion designed specifically for you?
Um, I suppose you can't, but most people.
Then
will.
what's holding you?
Hmm?
If you
Would
can't prove that it's not an entirety of illusion to you, then what's holding you? Why would you give yourself moral restraints?
because you don't want to be punished by the law, and ultimately the law controls
This is why, and this is
pleasure
why
seeking,
people
pain avoiding individuals.
exactly. So they are good as long as there is a law to hold them accountable. But once they are in the government and they are the law, then they're gonna just do what we are talking about. They're gonna murder countries, they're gonna rip off countries, they're gonna enslave countries, and they're gonna rob the world and buy them penthouses in Park Avenue.
So the way to avoid the situation is to check that these people who claim to believe in God. Oh,
They
oh,
don't
okay.
even
These are
believe in
atheists, and,
the
they. So you'll just have to say, well, it's only
they
if you do believe in God do we, would we trust you to, run the country. There we go. I mean, that used to be the old way in America too.
don't believe them when they say they believe in laws of morality because they are weak. Once they get the power, they won't look at things from the same thing.
Yes, I understand that that there would be people who don't believe in God, but who would claim to believe in God in order to get for themselves a higher moral status than an atheist. So an atheist would pretend to believe in God in order to get the protection and the status of the, religious group that he has chosen to ally himself with,
I'm
and
not. I'm not talking
this
about
remains a
atheists.
problem.
Who pretend.
Hmm?
I'm not talking about atheists who pretend that they are religious in a religious community in order to survive. I'm talking about atheists who are widely open about it and they are saying that they are atheists, and yet they think and attack religion by being the cause of all the wars and the murder in history, while they are not murderers. But the truth is, atheists are the biggest murderers in history because the people who say this and advocate for this, I'm an atheist, but I have morality and I don't need a God to tell me what's moral and what's not. He's only saying that because he's incapable of escaping the accountability when he does that. But the very same atheist people who are in ruling and who are in the government when they don't have accountability. They are murdering entire countries. It's hypocritical from their sides to say that they have morale because they truly don't. Do you trust someone with no boundaries to hold them and give him all power possible in the world?
No,
No one
of
thinks of
course not. I'm already persuaded that theocracy is the way to go. But how are we to win the arguments? Is I guess the next question.
the next question is answered by C.S. Lewis very, very beautifully. You know C.S. Lewis?
Yes, he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and
Exactly. He
was a
said that
Christian.
the most powerful arguments against God used to be that if there is a good God and he's all just and powerful, then why is there so many suffering and death and destruction in the world? How could he allow Hitler to make the Holocaust? How could he allow forests to be wiped out, earthquakes, tsunamis? I mean, a lot of ugliness in the world that just makes you think that if there is an all powerful and all good God, he would not allow these things. But he realized later on that this argument is the very argument of making God, because he said, why would I find the show distasteless and I am supposed to be part of it? It's like being in a universe where there is no light and creatures evolved to have no eyes, and yet all of them are saying it's dark around here. Where did this perception of light came from, even though it was never exposed to us? And he said that the argument here falls apart because our sense of justice comes from a complete unjust world. That doesn't make sense. Where did that sense of justice came from? It just gave him meaning.
I think even dogs can
Complicated argument.
feel
It's it's amazing.
injustice.
It's amazing. I mean, it's really, really complicated argument, but I used to stop face this question when they say, I mean, if you believe in a good God, then why there is so much suffering in the world? How could God allow Hitler to do what he did?
There is a verse in the book of Isaiah that says God created good and evil. So there is no argument. Well, there shouldn't be any argument between from Jews and Muslims, sorry, and Christians who have who also have adopted the book of Isaiah. Except that there's different translations, but the
Yeah,
verse goes, I the Lord create good
before,
and evil,
before you
created good
believe
and
in the
evil.
book, yes, I understand. I mean, once you believe with the book, that you after that you can consider the book as an argument. But before you get to that point, you need to use logic and reasoning in order to understand that that book is truly come from God, because the belief is step by step. First of all, we need to establish the fact whether there is a metaphysical reality such as God or not, and then whether this book is really from God or not. And then once we believe those two entities, only then we can use the words of the book as arguments. So he was an atheist who did not believe in the book itself. So the argument is completely logical and metaphysical to establish the link between a metaphysical truth, which is God, and the book, which is a physical, materialistic thing between our hands.
Um, I I understand the problem of theodicy is to be why would God allow evil? And the answer must be that if the purpose of our life is to show God that we are capable of telling the difference between good and evil in theory and in practice, then obviously there needs to be evil for us to choose between.
And the answer to us as Muslims is that if you are not capable of doing bad things, then you're just weak. But if you can do them and you stop yourself from doing them, you're reach your uttermost value and virtuousness.
Well, yes. There's still a problem in that people know that that a certain course of action is the right thing, but they don't do it because they're afraid of punishment from an oppressive government or something of that nature. They don't want to suffer. They 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 don't adhere to their principle. So they may know what the right thing is, but they won't do it because they fear being, jailed or fined or in some way suffering loss of status. And this in a way is understandable because obviously, we would do it if we were rewarded for doing it. But if our government turns bad, then there will be no immediate reward for doing the right thing. And therefore, it is important to make sure that most people do the right thing for the laws to be fair enough.
Exactly.
And this is all we have to argue for.
Of course, I mean, nothing that can come now, right now, nowadays, without an argument. And I think that one of the most important things is it's not the quality of the argument that really plays a role. It's only the balances of power. An argument over the veto is easily won. I mean, it's the biggest dictatorship in the history from countries that really are invading other countries for democracy. The argument is really clear, but you simply cannot turn the table because you have a good argument, but you have to turn the table when you have the power to do so.
Well, I suppose the problem is that a tiny minority can oppress a majority, and for the majority to organize against the oppressive minority, they have to have a system of rules that allows them to organize themselves. And I'm saying, under the current system, there is nothing. there is nothing for Western men to organize themselves around. They don't even believe in God, and therefore they won't have a system that is capable of allowing them to challenge and defeat their oppressor, because the I mean, I would argue that only theocracy supports patriarchy, and patriarchy is a society that prioritizes the preferences of married parents. And this is because if we grew up in a home with a father and a mother, we will have imprinted in our minds the idea that in this small group that we call a family that we grew up in, there was this idea of who leads a family and our position in it. And children sort of know that maybe we can appeal to mother if father says no, or vice versa, but they would have some idea of who calls the shots.
And this brings us to the point of a major conflict of interest. What you're talking about is a society that is healthy and functional, but that is not in the best interest of money hungry and fueled with greed kind of government. So,
But it has, in order to maintain its power, um, the ability to distract us from thinking about these things, by saying, "Oh, here's another kind of recreational sex for you to indulge in. Oh, we're going to legalize this other drug," and they do that in order to distract us from challenging and defeating their arguments
and you
and
can,
their
and you,
of living.
and you the human nature of dopamine induced addiction of punctual pleasure instead of the long term work and hard work and sacrifice that could or could not give you a result, but it's in a good way. I mean, most people just go to punctual pleasure instead of working on a long term, and this is deeply embedded into our nature, into a system called the reward system. I mean, it has a physical component. It's not just some statistical observed psychological behavior. So they do understand these things, and they do know that, for example, we are living now in a time that you can call it Pax Americana, just the same as Pax Romana in the ancient world, where Rome was the center of the world, and all the riches would go to Rome. And there were the borders of the empire where most wars and conflicts were going on. But inside the empire, there was a stability period that most things flourished. And funny thing is, that's when the first feminism movement starts, and then the renouncement of God, and then homosexuality, and then the empire fell apart. So that's how it works. And when we
Yes,
come
yes,
across,
because sexual morality is the first thing that
yeah,
you,
the
as a
first,
supreme,
it's the first thing
as
that
most
happens.
powerful country around, you think you can get away with.
And the same thing of America and the United States reached a certain level. I mean, when you look at the United States in the 40s and in the 50s, it looks as a good country that was went through a war, and men were doing their job and women were doing their job, and the family was preserved. And after all, and then like 10 years after maturing that its dominance, and even though there was this Cold War, but it wasn't an actual threat, same way they paint it, we noticed that the high rise of feminism started in the 60s and in the 60s and the 70s, and at the time there was this tycoons that are really really dangerous and tough people, such as Rockefeller and the Rothschilds, and they have really deepened their hands into the government. And for example, there is a documented case of I think it's called Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays is the founder of public relations, PR, and propaganda. This documented case is about how they convinced women into start smoking for smoking companies because they realized that they are not selling their cigarettes to half the population. When Rockefeller saw that, he just wanted to use feminism to get women to work in order to devalue the workers and in order to tax the half of the population that is not being taxed for the government. So the superiority of the government now is taking a new turn into we want money, as much money as we can, because we're deficit spending in order to expand our military. And we need a population that doesn't argue our war because we're going to send people to die for our own interest. Of course, they're not going to agree. So we need this whole system that lets them believe that the world hates us and that we are the good of the world, and we inherit this moral obligation of correcting something wrong, and we use our political power to explain to people that democracy is something really worth dying for. And the truth is, it's not a democracy, it's an oligarchy. I mean, presidents really come and go, but who actually rules, we know. It's big corporations and banks. End of story.
Mhm. And the problem is, of course, the operation of democracy and general elections and the year-long election campaigns,
Funny
year-long presidential campaigns.
very complex tax code and don't have a clear law on the financing of the campaigns of elections for the Congress or for the House of Representatives or wherever. They don't really have these restrictions on how do you get your money and where do you get it from.
Yeah, and also the thing is that there is no need for them to have elections. And in fact, George Washington, in his farewell speech, warned against political parties. And people can
Yes.
still read it, but they don't take it seriously.
Yeah. Now,
It seems they can't get, out
explain.
of the habit of having elections.
Now,
Hello,
yes,
you
I'm
dropped out
listening.
for a bit. Mhm.
No, I'm listening.
So I'm saying they, I think they understand that it's not necessary to have general elections, and I know that well, or the people who can be who are capable
I
of
don't
understanding these
think
arguments can be made to understand it, but then they'll feel that it's a kind of sacred cow, and
I don't think that the election is the problem. Their constitution is written beautifully, actually. I think the problem is to vote based on popularity instead of competence and trust, and you end up with Trump as a president.
a lot of people think Trump would be less warlike than Biden.
I don't think so because I think that the exterior politics of the United States is always the same. It's never going to change. The interior, maybe. They have some things into taken into consideration, but the Secretary of State and the exterior, they are the same aggressive imperialism. They're not going to change that. I mean, they really have a world to rule. So
Yes, but way back in the time of Washington, he did even talk about a military industrial complex.
if one of them is pro-war and the other one is not, have you ever known a president to not be supportive of Israel? I mean, all of them were. All of them
Yes,
did the
because
same.
Israel represents, I suppose, for any global empire, they would want Israel because of its special um, divine status, more or less.
Exactly.
If, if, if you're Muslim or Christian, you'd want to,
This is
have it as
why
part of your empire.
exactly this is why I told you the exterior policies of the United States are not going to change. What changes is maybe the interior policies, but the exterior it's always going to be the same because all of them are going to want Ismail. All of them are going to use the same tricks in order to rule an empire they have. That's it.
Yes, but it's not very popular, this empire with the American people.
Yes, it's not, and it's. I'm telling you, once you do something wrong, it's only gonna happen as long as you're strong. And the day when America is not that strong, there is gonna be a geopolitical void that's gonna be filled by American blood, and I hope that I won't be there when that happens.
I suppose the problem is also, if you think of America as a very wealthy person who's always had everything it wanted, it would be clinging to power because they cannot bear the thought of being lowered in status and losing Israel. And I think the cost of running a global empire is getting to be too much for them. And but they don't want to admit that they're wrong, and that is what is making them double down. But there is no need for America to run itself as a global empire. It just has to put its own house in order.
But now they are in too deep; they cannot just pull out.
Well, they could just not do it anymore, but I mean, it can't be done without regime change. That is why I think they cling to democracy because it is through representative democracy whose elections they rig that they control the world.
Well, they understand. They understand the world very well. They have a tremendous amount of experience with the world, and they know once they pull out, someone else will take over immediately, like the Russians or the Chinese or so. They won't hand anything on a silver platter. Possible.
But sometimes they have no choice. I mean, I'm sure the Ottoman Empire didn't want to, let go,
Well, they
and
didn't.
it.
But the price now is too high for Americans. I mean, do you think their economy don't lie on this net of complex net of communication, trade throughout the world? It does. So strategic points matter to America more than it matters to another country because its economy depend on it, and it's a big, big economy. And wars affect America more than it affect another country because its economy is very, very big. And so they are really stuck because of their greed and their money. You are only wealthy because you are interfering everywhere. If you stop interfering everywhere, things are not going to go your way and you're going to go poor. That's it.
Yes, but by interfering everywhere, you become unpopular, and then people say, "No, we don't want to be under you. Maybe we'll, you know, maybe we prefer to be run by China or Russia or Iran. Anyone but you.
Well, it's not
We'll
up to
take the
you.
risk." They might be
It's
saying, the smaller countries might be saying.
it's not up to the countries to say. It's up to the $900 billion they spend every year on their military.
Yes, but it's not very popular with the American citizens, and that is what the deep state fears, I suppose. That's why they're coming down so hard on these Ivy League universities whose students are demonstrating against Israel.
This is why we need to destroy families in order to make it easier to control people.
To destroy what? Sorry.
Families.
Um, I think the military structure is well, it's not familial, but it is very structured. So um, in a military organization, there's always a leader, the general, and his orders are given. They cascade downwards, and if somebody doesn't pass them on, it is known. If somebody doesn't carry them out properly, the weakest link will soon be found under such a structure, which is the structure of a pyramid,
For
which is
example, they don't
basically what
take
the
good care.
patriarchy is.
They don't take good care of their veterans, and the motivation that drives youngsters to go to war or to go to the military was usually always have been throughout history uh, patriotism
Or and
and power.
women and booty, they expect it to be rewarded properly. And
Exactly, they expect it to be rewarded properly. But in Islam, for example, In the Roman Empire, let's take the Roman Empire for example. First, they were rewarded properly because they were given land and they were given gold and they were given slaves. So they would do that for a certain amount of time, and then they will retire and get their land and slaves, and they practically become wealthy at the time. So this is a good motive to go to the military. But the Roman Empire, when it had that army, it had its territory, and it had its power, and it was rich to afford such a reward to its soldier at the time. But let's take the Islamic State, for example. It it did not really gather a lot of resources at first because it was a desert at the time. There was nothing they could really offer people to reward. And in order to fight, the reward was in the afterlife. So you need really to believe into this book and this prophet and the reward in front of you in the afterlife, and then go and die for that. And surprise, surprise, a lot of people believed in that, hundreds of thousands, and they all fought wars and they end up taking two of the biggest empires throughout history, the Romans and the Persians, in a question of like 2 years.
You're saying that, sorry, the Romans conquered Persia and something else?
No, the Muslims conquered the Romans and the Persians in the same summer.
And what what was the reason for their success?
Uh, the the reason for that success is that they could recruit a lot of people, not out of poverty, but out of faith. People
I
could endure
see.
hunger. People could
But there
endure.
was a division of the spoils. I think 20% there was a tax. It's like whatever booty you get, 20% goes to Muhammad, something like
Yes,
that.
yes,
Khums.
20% goes to Muhammad in his life, but when he dies, all that fortune will be gathered and given away. Profits don't be inherited. That's the thing. It won't go to his children or to his children after that. No.
But this seems to me to be a better system. I mean, uh, so Muslims would have this sort of war party, in that, it's like, well, that country over there is ripe for conquest. We can do it, men, can't we? And these men would, work out. I mean, it would be like possibly a commercial enterprise. Can we do it? Is the likelihood of success, greater or less than 75%? And if it's greater, around that, we'll do it. If not, we won't bother. Because the logistics of waging an imperial war is different to that of a defensive war. And so you,
Yes,
you need the very best um, military personnel and not,
exactly.
cannon fodder.
Mhm. Yes, you need the best military personnel, but at the time it was different because uh, nowadays you don't need the physical capabilities that used to be a requirement in ancient ages because now technology is overtaking the military institution. But in those days, it was exclusive to really strong men. Not all people could fight for from dawn to dusk.
Yes, because warfare is now conducted by people who go to an office in a suit and operate drones.
Exactly. And
So
officers
I think
and
there
officers.
is still the possibility of incentivizing um, people into wanting something better than what they have now after they have for so long experienced the fruits or the rotten fruits of um,
So
degeneracy and consumerism.
bring up the issue of the reason of recruitment. Like I said, it's first driven by patriotism and by reward. And in Muslims, it's driven by faith and reward. The lowest rate of post traumatic stress psychological disorders is among Muslim soldiers because they really believe they are fighting for the right reasons. But most Americans just find out later on that they are fighting for the wrong reasons. They're just killing people in their homelands.
Yes, and that I think is the worst thing. It's like, oh, I lost an eye for some stupid war that nobody at home cares about, who think I'm stupid for having
Exactly.
gone, to
When you
Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever.
But when you believe in a God, you think that you're doing it for a God for a good reason. You say, I lose an eye for a God. It's really healthy to have faith when you go to war instead of just patriotism and reward. That would
Yes,
destroy a
and
human being.
you'd fight more bravely as well if you did believe in God. And um, and one of the things that I've noticed about the war memorials in Britain is that they're all dedicated to the glory of God. The men who died in World War One and World War Two. It doesn't say to the glory of British foreign policy. It is dedicated to the glory of God, because they're kind of, well, wanting to
Soldier
make it
believe.
better,
That's the question. It doesn't matter what it say on a monument. What matters the
because they
most
don't
is what
believe
it
in it.
believe. If the soldier actually believed that the war was for God or not.
Yes, but these
That's the
lies
question.
are burdensome to the psyche of
Easy now, easy now to
those
make monument.
those called on to believe in it.
It's easy to put a monument now in the United States and say that it's for God and people who died in Iraq, killed a tyrant. But you can go and ask any soldier who fought in or did tours in Iraq, and he would tell you that that is a lie. They did not do it for God, they did it for oil.
Hmm.
And that's it.
So, one of the things I've noticed about the Quran is that it regulates um, gender relations, labor relations, consumer relations, and international relations. It is truly a holistic set of rules to deal with, well, the most
Practically,
important things.
practically most issues, yes.
And I think it easily wins all the arguments. But it
Yes.
surprises me that more Muslims do not use it. They waste their time trying to prove God's existence, and I I think really, if the government said were to change its mind about propagating atheism, and said no, we should believe it's good for us, and all that kind of stuff, people would believe,
But they
because
know,
people
but
aren't
they know
just
the
that
power.
pliable.
They fear the power of Quran. That's the problem. I mean, it starts as a logical and as a necessity system of morale in order to save the society from its catastrophic failure, only to end up with true believers who are claiming to overthrow the entire system.
Well, I mean, I find that the problem is, well, the people I talk to, they hate their government, but um, they they're also Islamophobes and anti-Semites, and hate the idea of the Abrahamic God, whom they think is stupid, or they think people who believe in God is stupid. But I think they just think Christians are stupid, and so it's a kind of self-hating thing. Um, and it seems to me that they're confused really about why they hate religion. Um, Maybe it's because they hate their own religion, which tells them to worship a Jew.
And it's also a very difficult thing to convince someone that he will be judged and he will be punished for the things he know are bad and he got away with them, but you're telling him no, you didn't get away with them. There is a judgment day, and you're gonna pay for it. I don't think he's gonna like that, and he won't accept it. Like you said, arguments are easily won using, for example, the Quran. But it's not a question of him understanding it or being convinced or not. He is being convinced, but he conceals that because admitting it will be an admission of guilt.
Well, there is the option of repentance, because it's a very strong idea in Judaism, and the idea is that it's not too late to repent, um,
God said,
as long as
God said
you're not dead.
repenting is an easy way out, except for those people who are really proud to admit that they did something wrong and ask for forgiveness.
Yes, I mean, and for in Judaism, the process is called shuva, and it's a four-stage process of confession, cessation, resolution, and um, restitution. So, if you've gone through these four stages, you're not going to forget about it. But I think a lot of people think, oh, I seem to have made a mistake. I hope nobody notices, and I won't
Exactly.
talk about it. But I'm saying the Jewish way has to be completed, even for Gentiles, so that everybody knows that you made a mistake, and and everybody remembers hearing you say you'll never do it again. So if they catch you doing it again, well, you know, they'll know,
Exactly.
and you'll be shamed. But these are very simple ideas, really, and I'm surprised that not more people are making them.
The idea is very simplistic, but the problem is human ego and human arrogance and the refusal of admission.
Yes, I think the reason why these short-termist people, who I think understand my arguments but refuse to accept them, is because they think we don't want to join your non-group, because there are not many secular Quranists at all. And we prefer to be comfortable in our group of anti Semites and Islamophobes, because there are more of us, and we can, spend our time complaining about the Jews and the Muslims. And this is how we wish to pass our time before we die. And that is really um, how it is.
And in Islam, we do accept that as long as they just don't spread their ideology in public. So
So
someone,
I
someone
think these arguments should be put to these Islamophobes who still argue with
Yes, yes, it
Muslims.
could be. It could be because Islam is teaching us to respect whatever it is the other person coming to conclusion with, and when it comes to our conflict, if it's really at that high, there is a law between us that judges. For example. In a society where Islam is the ruler and the Sharia law is the one in place, you don't go in public and you start saying Islamophobic statements. If you want to discuss them, you discuss them with somebody who actually knowledgeable with the subject in private, and he should be welcoming and treats your ideas with respect and uh, and understanding. He should not dismiss you for saying that you are stupid or that you shouldn't understand these things or talk about them or tell you to pack up your things or deport you for that matter. He should be receiving you with respect and talk to you about the ideas and try to explain whatever confusion or disagreement you have. And if after that these people are still like that, they can do whatever the hell they want to do in private, but they should not infect the society with what we think is the ideology that should be in place. Because the most important thing about social engineering is that the society is actually the thing that forms children. Children go to school, children play outside, children meet their uncle and meet the vendor and meets the carpenter and whatever. So society have a big pull on children. If we have a corrupt society, it's very hard to raise a good child. We will have a corrupt child, and this what does is it just goes to destroy generations after generations only to end up with a generation that is completely degenerate.
Yes, so the argument should be made um, as much as possible, and and even if it is not immediately accepted, um, it should still be repeated because eventually it will get through. And I think, however degenerate most people are, they're still capable of being shamed.
Yes, of course, they still can be shamed and they still can be turned into reason. So we
And I
are living
think,
now in a time of arguing the point until you're dead. I
yes,
mean, you couldn't-
and I think, it should be a pincer movement, and really the Jews are more likely to be to be shamed because they're the ones who are not fit to be are not fit for the purpose that they were made God's chosen people.
they can be
They,
shamed
they
into
have
that,
lost their identity, have they not?
but they have to move and talk and say the truth and admit to certain guilt in order to do that. And it's going to take a lot of courageous people to set this movement on course. So yes, they
Yes,
can be changed.
recently I spoke to
I highly
a
doubt that they will be perfect.
yes, I know these rabbis have a policy of not engaging with Gentiles.
Exactly.
So I think what could be done is to target a particular rabbi, so he will at least know that his presence is required you know to engage with people who want to ask him questions,
He
and
will engage
that
in private, but he will not engage in an argument or with other people. And the sad thing
they're
is,
only required to answer questions, so
this,
that it's not hard at all to
the
do.
sad thing is, they are really knowledgeable. They will be extremely effective in an argument, but they will refuse to engage, and that just leave room to non-knowledgeable people to say whatever they gonna say.
Yes, because why do you think that is?
Because they are extremely knowledgeable.
Yes, you're saying, why would these rabbis leave, let Jews who are ignorant talk about Judaism when they could be doing it themselves?
Because they talk about it in public to a lot of people, and they want to talk about it in private to their people.
I think that there is a tactical reason why they refuse to engage with, in a debate,
Yes,
because
it's understandable. Yes.
so really the thing to do is to repeatedly invite a particular rabbi, so nobody is in any doubt that he is, being invited to answer a few questions.
Yes. But I doubt that he'd answer to a full extent due to certain policies and to especially what's going on in the world, because he would be right to feel like he's being entrapped into something.
Well, yes, but that I mean, you do know about the no hide laws, don't you?
Then no,
The no hide laws, Noahide.
no height laws. No, I don't.
Right. The seven of them, and they come from the Babylonian Talmud,
Oh,
and
well,
um, so it's basically, so it forbids idolatry, blasphemy, murder, theft, sexual immorality, eating an animal while it's still alive. And there is also the positive requirement to establish a court and legal system. And that and if a Gentile obeys these 7 Noahide laws, he is classified as a righteous Gentile.
Okay, so it's like basically like the Ten Commandments.
Yes, but Jews have always said the 10 Commandments are for us, and the 7 Noahide laws are for you, Gentile. You're not required to keep the Sabbath. It's just for us. But I know that Christians have ignored them, but Muslims have not. So I've been arguing that Jews should rank the 4 Gentile religions according to their conformity with the Noahide laws. And I'm saying this would make Islam the most Noahide Gentile religion, and it would make Christianity the least Noahide, because of its idolatry and blasphemy. Christians are supposed to worship an executed blasphemer as an idol, and they've been doing it for centuries, 1700 years. And they don't seem to be able to understand the enormity of their sin, I suppose. And nobody will tell them.
And also the enormity of their absence. I mean, we don't see a lot of people come in and lay down arguments and thorough study of their religions. All what we see is certain highlights of a religion that it's brushing an entirety of a nation or bunch of countries altogether. But we don't hear a method and like the scientific method that shows the structure of the religion, shows its values, shows where it comes from, and thoroughly examine the evidence. This absence
yes,
of
I mean, Christianity is entirely uncodified.
I'm sorry, what?
I was saying Christianity is uncodified. You can't get any Christian to say, here are the Christian principles, because there are none. Nobody can agree on them. They can't even agree on the Trinity.
And the problem is because the book, it has been altered so many times by people. There's nothing left of it, actually.
Yes, and it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't have laws, and it's not from Jesus, let alone God. So Christians have an inferior scripture, and this is very easy to point out by Jews and Muslims who, for some reason, do not make those arguments.
Exactly, because it has been altered so many times now. It's basically there is nothing left of it. So, like you said, it has theoretically a scripture, and it could be easily argued against because at some point they couldn't even agree on the age of Moses in the same book.
Well, I suppose I don't really go for the narratives. It's sort of like, well, Maimonides said there are 36 capital offenses in the Torah. So, well, that would make it a very tough religion to obey. And Christians haven't been obeying it. And they've been certainly flouting the prohibition against idolatry and blasphemy, because Christians do worship a man who was executed for blasphemy, and nobody will say a word about that to Christians. I guess the Jews are too afraid, but then so have been Muslims. But Muslims are not so easily excused because of chapter 18, verse 4 of the Quran, that commands them to admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son.
I couldn't agree more.
And Muslims don't like talking about that either.
Yes, they don't like to talk about that because let's say that we have a bigger fish to fry. We cannot even start with these details when we are being fought on the front of having a having our God questioned, having our prophet questioned, having our book questioned. I mean, the religion is being attacked on its fundamentals. We're,
Yes, but even so, you can still say it's still the best available guide to humanity, the Quran. And
it
nobody,
is, but
even the
but it
most
is taught on
rabid
its
Islamophobe, can't think of a better book.
you you are reach these conclusions because you have seen the consequences of not having that book. But the people in the Muslim world had this book from their infancy. They take it for granted. And the scholars in the Muslim world are afraid of that. And they think that if these climate that it's taken over the world of materialism and monetary success, and if it's gonna come here, it's gonna just make the people who already see the Quran as something for granted is just gonna uh, take them out of Islam, and that's what we're afraid of. So we are fighting to establish the fundamental principles that this book is from God, that there is a God, and this God is described in this book, and this book is of God. Only then, when we are really ensured that our population is safe from these ideas, then we can talk about the ideas of Christianity versus Judaism versus atheism versus, and we try to live on
Don't
others.
you think it's quicker to undermine the entire political system of the West first because it's coming from there, it's coming from America,
Yes, exactly.
and
I
it's
mean, they,
quite easy to do it,
yes,
really.
this is why I like Bolson very much because he took it on the offensive. I mean, Muslims have been playing on the defensive for very long. They should take it at the offensive. They should attack the West. Exactly. Yes, I agree.
And they haven't got a leg to stand on, really. They don't believe in Christianity. They don't believe in liberalism. They know uh, they haven't got an official moral system, and this means that the American citizen is entirely at the mercy of Congress, who can pass laws and inflict them on the American Republic, on the American public.
Exactly. Yes.
And really, it's just a matter of getting them to uh, face the fact that they haven't got anything better. They may hate Islam, they may hate the Quran, but they haven't got anything better. And the people who most object to it are unmarriageable bachelors who are not looking to get married and are, in fact, unmarriageable. I'm thinking of, members of the dissident right. They're all unmarriageable bachelors. So, if they're going to complain and say it can't be Islam, it's like, yeah, because you don't, we're not going to listen to you because you're unmarriageable bachelors and you don't want to get married and you're gay and you don't have any investment in the next generation and you just want to die in peace. And you consider it a success if you go to your grave without having to face the inevitable correction. And then we go on to address the people who still want a future in the West, the people who want to marry. Maybe there won't be enough of them. And then they'll say, well, yeah, I guess it's too bad, the West will have to
Well,
die because most
I
of
think
you,
not.
or
The
hardly
problem,
any of you, want to marry and
the
have
problem is
legitimate children.
not many of them. The problem is there is too many of them, but they don't speak up. That's the problem. Because all of these anomalies are actually coming from minorities. But when you are a minority and you are an activist, you get to reach the powerful people, you get to reach the media, and you get to be to appear on TV, and you get to influence uh, the majority of people. Even though you are a minority, but your power will have a very big shadow on reality. And most people are actually normal people who wish to get married and who wish to have a normal life. But they get influenced by these minorities, and the minorities are the one they appear on the media. It's not the normal people who appear. So there are actually more normal people than bad people. That's the truth. But
But they are the silent majority.
they are the silent majority, exactly.
But the arguments, I think, are simple enough, and it is a matter of getting other people making them. But for some reason, they won't make them. And I'm talking about Muslims. They don't make them. They they seem to prefer to argue about whether God exists, and I'm saying it doesn't matter if God exists. The reason for having a religion is to make young people marry and have children and stay together for the sake of their legitimate children. That has really been the role of all the religions that you might have heard of. It's only the secular political ideologies that don't take marriage seriously.
Well, it's a pillar of society that should be taken seriously because if there is no legal binding that holds the family together, it tends to fall apart. It's due to human nature.
Yes,
Family
and they
must
also
be
suffer
legally
from
binding.
degeneracy because, I
Yes,
mean,
they do.
they're the ones complaining about
There is no
immigration.
legal system that is based on the morality.
Yes, and they being an rapidly aging and shrinking society um, must be suffering the consequences of a low birth rate. They're always
Yes,
complaining
exactly.
about immigration, so you think, well, why do their governments keep bringing people in? It's because they're not fit for the purpose of doing the jobs they are to do. And
As I
their
said, you
government
can.
is too afraid to ask them to do it.
Yes, of course. They want immigration because it's the only solution to the problem of this family problem.
Yes,
Because it's
and
the
the anti-immigration parties refuse to say it's because the white working classes are not having enough children. They'll be saying, "Oh yes, look at the horrible Muslims. It's the Jews who did it to you."
yes, it's always like that. Yes, they have to point out fingers in order to conceal the trick. It's the way magicians do it. Actually, they do something and they do it with the other hand, but they bring something to conceal the trick, and the concealant of the trick in the geopolitical world is always Jews and Muslims and whatever religion they find really attractive to them.
Yes, so the bogeyman, and I guess what's happening now is really people are just waiting to die. They don't want to marry a woman of their own race, even if one could be found to marry them. Um, they don't want to do that,
They
but they
have managed to
say they
ruin
will.
women for men as well.
Hmm?
They have managed to ruin women for men. I mean, women are not really attractive to men anymore.
Yes, I suppose that the more marriageable white women and white men would want to marry outside their own race because they think they'll get a better deal.
Exactly. It became a question of deal instead of a question of going home to a woman that actually take care of you, and a husband who goes to his wife that takes care of him and takes care of their children. Became more of a business deal and who gets most out of it.
Yes, so what I propose really is to say, look, um, only only marriageable men and women need to take an interest in this because obviously the men and women who don't want to marry won't be at all interested in my proposal.
Yes, because they don't care. They have what they have and they are capable of dealing with it and they are not invested in the next generation.
And what they tend to do is they waste their time doing things that won't work, such as Christian nationalism. I don't know if you notice on Twitter that it keeps trending, and these Christian Americans, want to use Christian nationalism as their way to fight against, the degeneracy, the matriarchy. But it's really a trap for them because to make Christian nationalism work in America, they would have to pass a Christian amendment, and passing a Christian amendment would mean to make America a Christian republic um, end the would abolish the First Amendment. But they're too stupid to see this, or they don't care.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe I don't think it will arise now. I think that the problem of the United States of America is just like the problem of every empire before it. Internal problems where division is gonna take it down, and that's the biggest risk on America. It's an internal risk. I mean, it's not an external one.
Yes, I suppose the whole idea is really to say here is the solution. So when things finally go under, there is a solution, and if it's there, things might not be so bad for you. And in the meantime, challenge them to find something better, and they can't, and so they continue um, ignoring the obvious solution. I've been doing this for years, and I know the dissident right make a point of not discussing my solution, but I see recently that more and more of them are more interested in theological debates about you know, whether race is more important than religion or the other way around, and whether anti-Semites should use Christianity to fight the Jews or something else. So these are the latest developments that I can mention to you. So there has been some movement.
Yes, there has been, but they are easily stopped in their tracks because here's the thing. I mean, you understand the mass psychology of the Americans in votes. I mean, the vote is really decided in the few months before the actual vote, and this just tells you how much the population have a rigorous analysis on the people they are actually electing. They don't. They just follow the novelties and simply the news. That's it. So even though we can make things move now, but in order for them to become a real issue and something that it's really being discussed in the community, it takes a lot of work. A lot of work.
Yes, I know that the generations do not really discuss politics with each other. I mean, if you look at the faces of the dissident right, you'll see that the still youngish men and appear to have no guidance from their fathers, who are
Exactly.
presumably
So
denying that there is a problem. They're boomer fathers. And I think that is fundamentally why they're going to fail, because people who have a religion, well, that their religion will ensure intergenerational cooperation, but people without religion will end up hating their children or hating their parents and not cooperating with them really, because fundamentally, as I was saying earlier, that any ancient religion that we may have heard of, and that the only five world religions would have the purpose of encouraging marriage, and marriage is, well, you can't have a family without marriage, or you have to accept that you cannot start a family without first marrying.
yes,
And the
exactly.
family unit is the building block of any um, functional society.
But that's the thing. We have science now, when you can conceive without actually having a family. And this brings the question of morality into the story, because that act shouldn't have been legal in the first place, but it is legal now because it's sold under freedom, and that will
Yes, but
undermine the
the
argument.
parenting is more important than the conception and the birth, isn't it?
Exactly, and undermining the parenting by making it more biological than the actual role of parenting. We should let
Yes,
the state
so that
parent
they're
our
being
children by
sold
sending them to school and spending most of their time in school being educated about God knows what.
useless
And
things.
yes, exactly. So the thing is, we let the state do the parenting, and we as cattle do the conceiving. And the conceiving, you don't need to have a family because we have scientific methods now to do that. But when you see from the moral standpoint, it's completely immoral, and in a Sharia state, this is completely illegal.
Yes, because you're not supposed to have children if you don't have a marriage license.
Exactly,
It's as simple as that.
simple as that. Yes.
And people can be reminded of it again, even though some of them will
And
pretend to be shocked.
it is beautiful and effective in its simplicity instead of all this confusion and complexity that only generates problems. And when you argue with them, you don't understand how could they not see how simplistic and beautiful solutions such as these do not apply into society and solve a tremendous amount of problems. But they don't accept them because we have an objective as government is to destroy a family and to educate and to become the parents of these children. And generation after generation, these masses can be manipulated into doing anything. If Jamaica doesn't want to pay me, I'll send the Marines to strong arm on them. And the Marines, who are they? They're just children who were educated by me on patriotism and monetary success. These are the basics that built an empire that actually took over the world.
Hmm.
So this is
Yes.
who we are actually against. We are against a machine that is fueling an empire that controls the world. So the argument is not easily won, and even if it is, uh, it's not gonna just roll down and die. I mean, it's the biggest empire in history. There will be some balances of power that needs to really change.
Well, really, I think democracy, representative democracy, just relies on the indifference and ignorance of the average female voter.
Exactly.
That
Why
is
did they allow
what,
them to vote in the first place?
pardon?
Why did they allow them to vote in the first place?
Well, yes. Well, the many men who shouldn't be voting either.
I thought of a system, the same system that you were talking about the church and how they choose the archbishops and stuff. Same system that Omar ibn Khattab did. So the people who select should be extremely knowledgeable. So we need to have like some sort of a pool of voters that is selected according to their knowledge and competence and trustworthiness. And we need to have also a pool of leaders who are extremely knowledgeable and powerful and trustworthy. And the pool of voters is the one that's going to select the pool of leaders instead of this popular candidate and gets the most popular vote and becomes president. I mean, it's nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't work for that long in ancient Greece, this democracy thing. So why, Westerners think it's going to work, in their own
Well,
countries is a puzzle.
if the Greek were to live today and see the democracy of today, they would call it oligarchy. They won't call it democracy because in ancient Greece, every man with a citizenship could vote in the parliament. But that's not the observable case today. We have an electorate college and electorate district that selects a representative from that district that represent you in the house, but not the general population have its voice. But in ancient Greece, it wasn't the case. Every man with a citizenship can vote in the parliament. So that was the democracy at the time. But the democracy of this time is an oligarchy according to the definitions of the Greeks. The rule of the few.
Of the corrupt few.
Exactly. How can they be few? Because they're extremely corrupt. I mean, they are rare in their corruption. That's how special they are.
Well, I mean, they just pretend to be different to each other, but are in fact the same. They're taking, yes, they are a cartel, a corrupt cartel, pretending, you know, dividing the spoils of the votes between each other. Like,
Mhm.
you do it for the next 4 to 5 years, and after that it'll be our turn again.
Exactly. That's exactly how it works.
Mm.
You
And so
continuously.
the entire system should be questioned, challenged, and um, but then you get these people who might even agree with you that it doesn't work, but when the crunch comes, they won't be able to stop themselves from voting again.
Exactly. That's the problem. I mean, I'm not against voting. I'm against who votes and on whom he votes. And that's the problem. Like I said, there should be not everyone should vote. Not everyone get to decide in everything. And I mean, we don't get people to decide in a brain surgery. We don't get people to decide on how to fly an aircraft. And yet we decide who holds the nuclear weapons and the fate of the world. How is that logical and reasonable? It's not. It should
Yes, it's
be.
crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy. I mean, we humans are really interesting in how to pick up our leaders. I mean, we're very specific about who opens our brains and who flies in the sky, but we're not specific on who is capable of destroying the entire Earth.
Well, also this idea that our leader, our national leader, should be a married father has fallen by the wayside. A long time ago, it seems, and maybe not in America, but certainly in Britain.
Yes, it
Because,
has to be.
I,
How can you not be unmarried and have all that power?
yes, so ideally, the national leader would be a married father with adult children who are a credit to him. So he would
Exactly.
have to be somebody in his 50s.
Yes, if he doesn't get exactly. And this is a way to get a person in his 50s or in his 45s or at that time is someone extremely competent and trustworthy. I mean, we have his life background. He's not somebody young who we do not have really experience with him in order to judge him properly. At 50 years old, you know his life. You know if you really could trust him or not. You know how knowledgeable and competent he is. So he is suited to be put in the pool of candidates to select from. But now we see
Yes.
them celebrating the fact that we have the youngest president or the youngest minister or the youngest. It's a catastrophe. You do not know whether this guy is corrupt or not, and you do not know what kind of coup is he's gonna wage. You don't know what kind of uh, hack or scheme he's gonna pull. But at a very old age, if he wasn't in the first place corrupt, that corruption would show. And so you'd know whom you trust and whom you don't. And also with time comes wisdom and competence. So he's going to be extremely knowledgeable and he knows what he's doing. So he would be fit to be put into that position.
Hmm. So it's already wrong, what it says in the American, is it the Constitution that says a man of over 30 can run for office?
In the Constitution, yes, I think it's 30. I think
Hmm.
it's on the office. I don't know. You mean the office of the presidency?
Yes.
I don't know. I think it's 30. I don't know. I
Yes.
don't know the information for sure, but I think it's 30.
Yeah.
But I think it should be much, much older. I think it should be over 40, over 45 maybe. And it needs to have, just like the Muslims used to have, the science of biographies of people, whether they are trustworthy or not. We see throughout their lives, we thoroughly examine them and see if they can say the truth or can't, did lie or they didn't, if they did steal or they didn't. It's like these thorough examination of his life for every down detail. And then we make a judge of
Yes,
character.
I was talking about this circle of virtue idea that I have, which is that um, it is to include people who are known to be honest and reasonable when they are making their arguments. And that they don't have to agree with you, all they have to do is admit it when their information is incorrect, be capable of understanding the difference between a sound and invalid, a sound and valid argument, and to have principles that they're prepared to declare and be seen to be following them.
Exactly.
So
It's
I
exactly.
hope you will join my circle of virtue. I'll send you the membership details in a bit, because I think
Well, the
this
circle of
is
virtue.
how we
The
kind of morally
circle
validate each other. you, I know in school, there used to be this thing called, conduct. So you see how you behave as a school child, but as you get older, you would have to be validated by the people in your um, circle of virtue, who will say that, you're okay to talk to, you won't, insist on believing in lies or will not admit it when the
but
information you rely on is incorrect.
capitalism system. Capitalism wants the most competent, despite the fact that it's trustworthy or not.
Um, well, I think to be competent, you still have to rely on correct information and use
Yes.
sound arguments.
Well, knowing correct information will only make you very, very powerful, but using that power for good or for bad, it relies completely on your morale.
Well, yes. So I mean, you can do something that is logical but immoral. So
Yes.
for example, you have something I want. Um, I can take it from you, and if you complain, I can kill you. It would be logical for me to do those things, but it would be immoral.
Yes, and that's the problem of our leaders. I mean, they are competent, they have the correct information, but they choose to do wrong instead of to do right. And
I
they,
don't think they're even being that. I don't think they know what they're doing, which is what's so even more annoying.
yes, they know exactly what they're doing. I
They're
don't think
taking
that
orders from Washington
they're very, very
because
intelligent. And
Washington reports them. So to that extent, it matters. They are being logical. Like, well, I'm getting paid more for taking bribes, and I like money, so I take bribes. That could be how they think, and I see
yes,
no um, no harm to myself if I continue doing that. So that's still logical.
yes, what stops me from doing it?
What might stop is that the system is going to end soon, and soon the money's going to dry out,
It
and
doesn't matter.
the
Well, it
people you
doesn't matter.
govern will,
It doesn't
do
matter what it
something
does.
about your corrupt rule.
Matter when the system ends. The system is much bigger to end than. Let's take another example, not the senators or the people in Washington. Let's take the CEOs of the financial institutions in the United States of America. They always cash in before things go down, and the government bailouts, and they spend those bailouts on themselves instead of the people they were supposed to save. And they just go. They don't care if the system is going to end or not. All they care about is who's going to standing after the system is going to go down. And the person standing is the one who cashed in before it all crashed. Sad truth, but it is the truth.
Yes, but I mean, what I'm saying is that I think everybody's agreed that this system is unsustainable because it's so unpopular.
Yes, of course it's unsustainable. I mean, all
It's
they do is
unpopular with Westerners. So if your
yes,
own
yes,
people
yes.
don't like what you're doing,
People, yes, they understand, but the way they think is like you said. I mean, they just get as much as they can before it all one goes down, and when it goes down, they just start blaming each other or some former government elected officials. I mean, that's what they always do. Take the
but
crisis of 2008, or the crisis of the 1998, or the crisis of or the case of Enron. It's always the same, but nobody goes to jail. They always end up blaming immigrants and Muslims, whatever, for a financial crisis.
Mhm.
Because they know nobody understands those things. And the truth is, they gambled a lot of money and they lost them, and they lobbied the government to give them tax-paying money in order to sign it billions of dollars of bonuses to themselves. What happened?
Mhm. Yes.
Oh, I think it's time to go. We've been
Yes.
talking for 2 hours,
For two
and it's been
hours, yes, yes, we but thank you for your input. I really appreciate your ideas and arguments, and I hope we can talk again.
hopefully. Thank you so much for having me, and have a lovely evening.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.